Hello, we encourage you to view the entire video and take notes. This information is certainly going to help you to assess the vocabulary of your class. Let's start! The process of learning new words is gradual. A lifetime may be necessary for development of vocabulary, particularly for second language learners. Although it's a crucial initial step, simply learning the meaning of new words does not guarantee word mastery, because word knowledge is complex and comprises the three factors of form, meaning, and use. Second language learners must be familiar with a wide range of word properties. At first glance, it may appear that assessing second language learners' vocabulary knowledge is both necessary and simple. Words are the basic building blocks of language, the units of meaning from which larger structures such as sentences, paragraphs, and entire texts are formed. Vocabulary assessment appears simple in the sense that word lists are readily available to serve as a foundation for selecting a set of words to be tested. Considering one point of view is that when assessing vocabulary, it's perfectly reasonable to write tests that determine whether learners understand and use a set of words as independent semantic units. Due to opposing viewpoint contends that vocabulary should always be evaluated in the context of a language use task where it interacts with other components of language knowledge in a natural way. The two perspectives are complementary to some extent in that they relate to different assessment purposes. Language testers as researchers and as practitioners. The distinction between the roles of language testing researcher and practitioner is perhaps the most important. The goal of the language testing researcher is to better understand, among other things, the psychological and contextual factors that affect performance in language assessments, the type of language use elicited by language assessments, the relationship between language use elicited in assessments and that created in real-life settings, and the relationship between the abilities engaged in language assessments and those engaged in real-life settings. The goal of a language testing practitioner, on the other hand, is to design and develop language assessments that are useful for their intended purposes. As a result of this accountability burden, language testing practitioners must deal with well-known constructs that may be broadly defined. As a result, while a researcher might be interested in the internal construction of meaning form through interaction with written text, a practitioner is more likely to be interested in reading comprehension. Practitioners and researchers may investigate different constructs, define the constructs of interest with varying degrees of specificity, and investigate varying ranges of constructs due to these differing purposes. But what is a construct? Understanding the roles of abilities and context, as well as their interaction as they affect performance on language assessment tasks, has been a persistent problem in language assessment. The way we perceive these roles has clear implications for how we define the constructs we intend to assess, as well as how we interpret and apply assessment results. According to Bachman 2004, these two approaches are quite distinct because they are based on different ways on defining the construct we intend to assess, as well as different assessment arguments. Several researchers have addressed the issue of disentangling ability from context in language assessment. Bachman, 1990, describes language testing's fundamental dilemma as language is both the object and the instruments of our measurement. That is, in order to observe, it's used to measure language ability. We must use language itself as a measurement instrument. This makes distinguishing the language abilities we want to measure from the method factors used to elicit language extremely difficult. Skehan, 1998, on the other hand, contends that the three underlying problems of language testing are inferring abilities, predicting performance, and generalizing across context. The abilities, performance, context conflict refers to the fact that these problems cannot be solved concurrently because each problem conceptualizes what is to be sampled differently. If the emphasis is placed on sampling abilities, for example, performance and context are likely to be overlooked or minimized, and vice versa if one chooses to sample performances or context. Language testers have historically attempted to resolve this dilemma or conflict by focusing almost entirely on either ability process or context task when defining the construct to be assessed. Reed and Chappell 2001 present a framework for vocabulary testing that builds on and expands on their previous work, Chappell 1994, 1998, and Reed 2000. They present a vocabulary testing framework that connects test purpose to validity considerations from test design to validation. They then uses examples from the three different approaches to definition construction to illustrate this framework: trait, behaviorist, and interactionalist, Chappell 1988. Their application of Chappell's 1998 definition of interactionalist approach to inferences with respect to vocabulary knowledge is particularly relevant here. An interactionalist approach to inferences requires that vocabulary knowledge and use be defined in relation to particular context. They also discuss test implementations. A new approach to test uses means going beyond test designs to measure learners' knowledge of relatively discontextualized word lists and considering what other vocabulary assessment needs must be met. And how is it operationalized? According to Reed 2000, the dimension which represents the ways we can expand our conventional ideas about what a vocabulary test is in order to include a wider range of lexical assessment procedures are classified in three dimensions: discrete and embedded. The first dimension focuses on the construct which underlies the assessment instrument. In language testing, the term construct refers to the mental attribute or ability that the test is designed to measure. In the case of a traditional vocabulary test, the construct can usually be labeled as vocabulary knowledge of some kind. The practical significance of defining the construct is that it allows us to clarify the meaning of the test results. Normally, we want to interpret the scores on a vocabulary test as a measure of some aspect of the learner's vocabulary knowledge, such as their progress in learning words from the last several units in the course book, their ability to supply the derived forms of base words like scientist and scientific from science, or their skills at inferring the meaning of unknown words in a reading passage. Thus, a discrete test takes vocabulary knowledge as a distinct construct, separate from other components of language competence. In contrast, an embedded vocabulary measurement is one that contributes to the assessment of a larger construct. In this case, the construct can be labeled academic writing ability, and the vocabulary scale is one of 5 ratings which form a composite measure of the construct. Thus, to determine whether a particular vocabulary measure is discrete or embedded, you need to consider its purpose and the way the results are to be interpreted. Selective, comprehensive. The second dimension concerns the range of vocabulary to be included in the assessment. A conventional vocabulary test is based on a set of target words selected by the test writer, and the test taker are assessed according to how well they demonstrate their knowledge of the meaning or use of those words. This is what it calls a selective vocabulary measure. The target words may either be selected as individual words and then incorporated into separate test items, or alternatively, the test writer first chooses a suitable text and then uses certain words from it as the basis for the vocabulary assessment. On the other hand, a comprehensive measure takes account of all the vocabulary content of a spoken or written text. Context independent, context dependent. The role of context, which is an old issue in vocabulary testing, is the basis for the third dimension. Traditionally, contextualization has meant that the word is presented to test takers in a sentence rather than an isolated element. From a contemporary perspective, it is necessary to broaden broaden the notion of context to include whole text, and more generally, discourse. In addition, we need to recognize that contextualization is more than just a matter of the way in which vocabulary is presented. So, context independent is a vocabulary measure in which the test taker can produce the expected response without referring to any context. On the other hand, context dependent is a vocabulary measure which assesses the test taker's ability to take account of contextual information in order to produce the expected response. The three dimensions are not meant to form a comprehensive vocabulary assessment model. Rather, they serve as a foundation for locating the various assessment procedures currently in use within a common framework, and they provide points of contact between tests that treat words as discrete units and those that assess vocabulary more integratively in a task-based testing context. In school terms, a language practitioner, a teacher, should select a test format based on his/her learning objectives and purpose. Furthermore, some tests are more practical than others in terms of administration and scoring time. They will learn which test formats work best in their respective contexts and for their specific students through trial and error and some reflection.
Okay, hello. So now I will start with these two phrases from these two authors that I found while doing the research. Will Hedden mentions that tests of vocabulary are often connected with reading skills, and that here we can test everything together, such as passive and active vocabulary or collocations, etc. Then we have Turnberry, who mentions that testing vocabulary also occurs in placement tests or diagnostic tests to find out students' level of knowledge. And we can also find testing vocabulary in achievement tests at the end of the school year. Now I'm going to start focusing in these vocabulary testing techniques that I found in Pavlov's article. Here we're going to focus only in some of them because she mentions a lot of techniques. Okay, so the first vocabulary testing technique is multiple choice, and the first thing that the author mentions is that this technique is easy to mark but quite difficult to design. Here we can use it either for testing single words, words in sentences, or words in texts. We have to take into account the fact that students may choose the right answer without noting the word just by the process of elimination. So here we have this to take this in consideration, because it is true that students may be like, okay, I'm going to choose this one because it's the one that makes more sense to me, but maybe they are not really conscious about the word. And here we have an example of multiple choice technique, but here I just want to mention that maybe we have some troubles with these words because this is a research study from someone of Czech Republic, so some words are just unknown for us. Then the author mentions cloze test, which examines active vocabulary because students are not given any options and they just have a text with gaps. And here a problem that was found is that it is not really clear if this technique belongs to testing vocabulary or to testing reading. And well, this is an example of what is a cloze test. Here we have the whole test, and then the text with the blank spaces and the options. Then we have grading sentences, and here the students have to make sentences from given words, And this is like a really this is like a really interesting exercise, but here we have like to keep in mind first that students must be at least from a pre-intermediate level, because they like need to be able to create specific sentences. And on the other hand, students will show if they can really use this particular word or words in a specific context. And here is an example of this technique. Like you have the instruction, the word, and the phrases that the student wrote. Then we have translation, and here learners can be tested to translation quite well, and it can test both meaning and form. But here we can have these like troubles where students may not be like able to find this equivalence between some words with like in the two languages that they are using. Then we have oral testing, and here the author mentions that to know a word also means to be able to pronounce it well. And also Dove suggested this like short oral test where you can like test vocabulary, and this one can be like used like with large classes, and these like short oral examinations could be a compromise for those teachers who want to like test their students, but they like want to save time too. So here basically the teacher needs to give like a topic to each student, and the student is going to research about that topic at home. The teacher obviously needs to give like some time to the students so they can like learn what they learned about the topic, and they can like have in mind what they are going to present. And here when the student already have the idea of the topic and what the student is going to say, the teacher is going to ask the student to present it. And basically the presentations must be about like a minute long. So as I said, we can save time. And here we have an example of how we can grade oral testing, and the other give these examples where you like just write the name, content, fluency, and the overall mark. In content and fluency, it is mentioned that you can go like from 1 to 5, where 1 will mean that the student like needs improvement, and 5 means that they are doing it well. Okay, then we have dictation, and here the teacher dictate words or sentences to student. And here the author mentions that if a student know like how to spell a word, he or she probably know what the word means. Then we have sentence completion, and here students are given incomplete sentences containing words that we need to test, and their task is basically to complete the sentences so they can make sense. Then we have reading, and through reading we can test passive vocabulary mostly, which is also useful for students as they learn to guess the meaning of words from context. And this is like really helpful for them like when they are like studying a language or English. And finally we have associations, which is the one that caught more my attention. And here students have to underline those words which belong to the keyword. For example, if the teacher says furniture, Students can mention words like house, table, floor, window, curtain, bed, kitchen, chair, etc. So here we have like a lot of options to play with. Then here we have an example of dictation. Then we have an example of sentence completion. And finally, we have the sentence, the references, sorry. And I think that's it for our presentation. If there's any question, you can like leave it on the comments and we'll be really glad to answer them. Thank